And in a quick logic chain threading from geography to population patterns to transport needs to debt markets, you now understand how Mexico's regular bouts of debt crisis are both endemic and inevitable. And then there is its government. Meaningful central authority has a prerequisite: the ability to reach all portions of the territory. Not only is that far from a given in Mexico, but much of what transport infrastructure exists is beholden to the needs of the oligarchs. Its use is not automatically available to the government. Making matters worse, the oligarchs have tended to develop the most useful patches of land. In Mexico's too dry mountainous north or its too wet mountainous south, there is little of economic interest and thus little oligarch activity and little infrastructure. Upwards of half of Mexican territory, concentrated in the far north and far south, exists in a sort of Hobbesian limbo, where anyone who wishes to exert sufficient resources can make his will a temporary reality. Mexico's borderlands are zones so lightly populated that local authorities cannot police them, and they have so little infrastructure that national authorities cannot reach them on a meaningful timescale. Even in periods of plenty, these areas will always be insufficiently patrolled and so will always be smuggling zones and can never be secured in the way that Americans define the term. In essence, Mexico lacks the geographic characteristics to be a successful state. Geography condemns it to be home to a poor, drastically unequal, underdeveloped society riven by regional and class-based cleavages that no degree of local investment or understanding can ever heal. The only other significant country in the world that was dealt as bad a geographic hand as Mexico is perhaps Afghanistan. If not for a few lucky oil discoveries around 1900, Mexico would have likely faded into oblivion long ago. But as wretched as Mexico seems from time to time, no serious observer would say that it is even remotely as bad as Afghanistan. The reason for that is quite simple. It is next to the United States, the global consuming superpower. Somewhat ironically, Mexico's weakness has become the key factor in ensuring its success. The sheer difference between the two countries' topographies, America's capital richness versus Mexico's capital poverty, America's ease of development versus Mexico's constant struggle, ensures that Mexican labor will always be both cheap and underutilized, making Mexican labor perennially attractive to anyone wanting to service America's nearly bottomless demand. In that differential lies the core of Mexico's economic success. In the next couple of decades, a shift of circumstances will turn Mexico from the United States' extremely junior partner to something significantly more. 4 factors are at work. 1. Chinese labor costs have skyrocketed. No country lost out to China's emergence onto the international scene as much as Mexico. Prior to China's joining the WTO in 2001, Mexico was the primary source of textiles and low-end manufactured goods to the United States. Despite China's many internal weaknesses, its ability to subsidize its inputs and outputs and marry them to low-cost labor in an environment of centralized political control allowed it to undercut countries like Mexico that relied on mid-cost labor and proximity. But those days are over. Leaving aside the issues of China's political stability, or lack thereof, ability to continue subsidizing its output, or lack thereof, and ability to manipulate the international economic system, or lack thereof, it has simply run out of cheap labor. Since 2002, Chinese labor has increased in cost by a factor of 6 to about $3 per hour. In relative terms, Chinese labor has increased from being 1/4 as expensive as Mexican labor to 1/4 more expensive. Considering that Mexico already has far superior transport access to the United States, and that there is a decades-old tradition of collaboration between American management and Mexican oligarchs, the numbers certainly are positioned for a labor cost-driven onshoring to Mexico. 2. American shale is supercharging the Mexican electricity system. Due to shale, the Americans have a massive glut in their natural gas system. Unlike crude oil, natural gas is, well, a gas, and the transportation of gases is difficult. There are only 2 means of getting it out of a supersaturated market. The first is to cool it into a liquid about -260 degrees Fahrenheit, and then ship it to someone who has the infrastructure capacity to safely return it to gaseous form. This liquefied natural gas, LNG, process is the only way to ship the stuff across an ocean. However, there are also many regulatory steps involved, and as recent energy politics in the United States have amply demonstrated, gaining national approval for a transnational energy infrastructure project is somewhat difficult, not to mention that freezing natural gas into liquid form is as expensive as it sounds. While dozens of projects have applied for regulatory approval, Only a small handful have achieved the necessary permits at the local, state, and national levels, and construction has only begun on one. Cheniere's Sabine Pass facility began construction in 2013 and is expected to begin operations in 2016. That leaves a lot of shale natural gas stranded in the American interior, practically begging for a market. But one of the great open secrets of the American energy complex is that it is already legal to export natural gas so long as it is by pipe and so long as it goes to Mexico. As of the beginning of the shale boom, there were already 9 natural gas pipelines crossing the border, supplying Mexico with nearly 1/4 of its natural gas needs, about 1 billion cubic feet per day, BCFD. Since the shale boom, however, work has begun on 3 major corridors as well as expansions throughout the export system in order to marry the ultra-cheap American natural gas to the Mexican power network and labor market. Exports doubled to 2 BCFD between 2010 and 2013, but the real growth will come in 2016. At that point, several new trunk lines will begin operation, allowing the export of U.S. energy to heretofore unreached Mexican regions up to and including the Mexico City core. Mexican imports from the United States are expected to hit 10 times their 2010 levels. Nearly all of that natural gas is planned to be used for electricity generation. Chinese competition aside, the biggest hurdle that has faced Mexican industry in recent years is reliable power supplies. The surge in shale gas into Mexico has already greatly mitigated that problem, and within a very few short years, Mexico's chronic rolling power outages will be a thing of the past. For manufacturers, whether Mexican or American, that removes one of Mexico's chronic limitations on industrial development. 3. Mexican demography generates a large market and a larger labor pool. Mexico also has a young population. Normally, this would be somewhat of a problem for a country at Mexico's stage of development. A capital-shy demographic combined with a capital-shy geography could forever trap Mexico in underdevelopment. In fact, that has been the trap Mexico has lived in ever since independence. But the positive aspects of a young population still apply. Mexico's young adults are hungry for goods and property. They just need paychecks. Luckily, their large number proportional to the overall population keeps their labor costs low and keeps foreign entities eager to invest in Mexico for goods production. While those investors may have initially been interested in selling those goods into the American market, there is every reason to service the local population as well. Doubly so since Mexico's lack of ability to self-industrialize means that internal goods supplies are so limited. In the early years, the Americans took brutal advantage of this with the Santa Fe Trail. American manufacturers were shipped to Santa Fe, a Mexican city, in order to build economic dependency upon the United States throughout the areas we now think of as the American Southwest. At the time the Americans founded the trail, Mexico was still an imperial Spanish territory. When the Mexican-American War occurred just 35 years later, most of the sparsely populated territory